Hello everyone and welcome to PC Retro Tech. In this week's video I'm going to be taking a second look at the beautiful Compaq Deskpro 386S. So I already made another video about this, there's a link above if you want to see that. But it was a really rushed video. I had to start filming late because I had to wait for parts to arrive, and then I finished early because of other commitments. And so I really didn't have a lot of time to go into it in any depth. So this time I actually have some really exciting things to try out on this. There's some new parts have arrived. I'm going to start off today by revisiting a couple of things that I glossed over in the first video, and then I'm going to move on to the new stuff, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So grab a cup of tea or whatever it is you do when you relax watching a YouTube video. This one's going to be fun. The first thing that I want to revisit is this Compaq VGA monitor, which I actually repaired in the previous episode. Two of the reefer capacitors had actually blown up. One was cracked and the other one actually caught a light. So I replaced them with these VMA capacitors. Now some people don't bother putting the capacitors back in because they're just there for some mains filtering, and if for some reason they short circuit they can actually create an additional risk. So they can short the mains to the internal metal chassis. Now that's not normally a problem because the chassis in these particular monitors is meant to be grounded. But if anything goes wrong with the mains wiring in your house or with the ground connection inside the monitor itself, then if you manage to get a finger to the internal metal chassis, that can be a shock hazard. So I prefer to put the capacitors back in, and these VMAs actually mitigate the risk a little bit. They're metallized film capacitors, and they tend to blow open circuit rather than short circuit, which is a little bit safer. But they also need to survive some fairly large spikes in the mains voltage, and the technical standard for that is the domestic Y2 standard, which means that they can withstand spikes of up to 5,000 volts. But you can't put a Y2 rating on a component like this because it's not really a domestic component rated at 650 volts. The Y2 rating only goes up to capacitors rated up to 350 volts. They probably handle the spikes just fine. In fact, these are self-healing, tend to heal over when there are large voltage spikes. But the original reefers, which I've now managed to get some direct replacements for, actually have a Y2 rating. Besides that, these are actually the right size. They're going to fit more easily. I'll be able to get two of them next to each other, which I had a problem with. And they have the leads the right distance apart. And I just prefer a more authentic retro experience, and the same when I do repairs. I know it's inside the monitor and no one will see it, but let's get a couple of these in and let's get on with the rest of the system. Can I remind you that working on CRTs is hazardous, and you need to have some electronics experience and to have sat down with someone who actually worked on CRTs for a living. Most of these will be retired by now, and they can explain at length the very many hazards that there are in these things and how you can deal with those. So these are the VMA capacitors that I'm going to remove. You can see that they're really installed in a dodgy way there, and it's very temporary. So I'm going to take those out by desoldering at the back here, and then we'll insert the reefers. The sound that you can hear is my desoldering station, and it just heats up the solder here and melts it, and then we just suck that away. This whole job could be done with a soldering iron, but it's just so convenient to use one of these things. And that's all that's needed, so let's take those out and put the reefers in. Well, that didn't take too long to get them back in. I apologise for the lighting here, but that's the two reefers in there. They're quite small compared to those big blue VMAs that we had in there. But they sit neatly in there, and they're making good contact, which is what we want. Otherwise there's really no point putting them in. And so let's get it all back together and check that everything still works. Let's just give it a little test. I'll turn on the monitor first, and that sounds okay. And I'll turn on the machine and see whether we get a picture. So the machine's booting up. Yeah, I can see a flashing cursor there. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so it seems like everything's still working, so let's have some fun. The first fun thing that I have this week is I found an original flyer for the Compaq 386S online scanned in, And so this is what the machine looked like when it was new. And this solves a little bit of a mystery. You remember in the first video I wondered what kind of branding the mice had and why it was different to the branding of the rest of the machine. Well, you can see in this photo that there is no mouse. It simply didn't come with one, so that certainly solves that mystery. The sales blurb is the usual sort of rubbish. In fact, they make a big deal about 32-bit here. Well, of course, the processor is 32-bit, but as you'll discover a little bit later, there is a little bit of a story to tell there. The technical specifications page says that there were 3 models. The Model 1, which came with just a megabyte of system memory and a 5¼ drive, and it didn't come with a hard drive. And then there were 2 additional models, the Model 20 and 40, which came with 20 or 40 megabyte hard drives. So on the final page here, you can see that there's actually a 3.5-inch drive in this, and it says that there was an optional 1.44 megabyte 3.5-inch drive. So I'm actually going to try out the drive in this and see whether it is a 1.44 megabyte drive, or whether someone somehow added a 720K floppy drive to it. But yeah, this looks really fantastic on the brochure. I will have to retrobrite this machine at some point, I think, to get it back to this original beautiful color. But it's still not in bad condition given how old it is. I've taken the floppy bays out here so that you can see the board a little bit better. And you remember from the last video, the CPU is down in here, and the 2 white chips next to it are the BIOS chips. The oscillator for the CPU is actually down in there. You can't see it at the moment, but it's just looking like one of these. It's a 32 megahertz one, but that's obviously divided by 2 at some point, since this is a 16 megahertz machine. The system memory is actually here. These are 256K by 4-bit chips, and there are 8 of them. So I think if I calculate correctly, that's 1 megabyte of fast DRAM. This is the Dallas real-time clock, the DS1287, and I have one of those on the way. It's going to take a little while to get here. I think these are just clones, so I don't know how accurate they'll reproduce the look of this one, but at least I'll be able to start the machine without having to use a floppy disk all the time. These are just 74LS logic chips. There's not really much hope of identifying what they do. The only other one that I can really identify for sure is this one. It's a Zilog floppy controller. Many of the other parts are Compaq parts, and when you look those up, you'll certainly find people trying to sell them to you since they're used in aircraft. But it's much harder to find people to tell you what they are or any specifications. Now this is memory for the VGA portion, and so that's certainly the VGA chip here. I don't know what this is. It's outside the VGA can, so I'm reluctant to say that that is a VGA BIOS, but of course that's a possibility. It could also just be a peripheral controller or an IDE controller or something like this. So it's actually interesting that this board is not really found online. So when I have a look around, I can find the jumper settings and layout for a number of 386S machines, but not this one. Very often this VGA part here is just a separate VGA card, and next to the speaker there is an additional connector for an external battery. I just have the Dallas thing, of course, and some of the jumper settings are different. There's different layout of jumpers on the board. So this board seems to be a little bit unidentified at the moment. I certainly can't find anything about it. Also, I can't find a technical manual or a service manual for the 386S. I can find one for the Compaq 386, but this is a quite different machine, as I'll explain a little bit later. So the first thing that I want to do today is look at the memory. You remember I have this 1 megabyte expansion board, and so what I'm going to do is put some modules on here. I actually got a hot tip from a viewer about how to locate some of these, and so I have managed to get hold of those. Unfortunately, the board they're on is from a Compaq 386, not a 386S, so it's not clear whether they'll be compatible, but they look like they will fit at least, so we'll give that a go. This little beauty here is the expansion board that I purchased, and it has 1 megabyte of RAM on the board itself, and you can see it has these 2 memory expansion modules. Now the board itself won't fit into my machine. This is for a Compaq 386, whereas I have the 386S. But I'm hopeful that the memory expansion modules will be compatible. Now you might wonder, why on earth would Compaq go to all the trouble of making an incompatible expansion board when the Compaq 386S machine came out? And I believe that the answer lies in the CPU itself. So the original Compaq 386 machine was a really big deal. They got the jump on their competitors such as IBM and others by being the first to market with a personal computer based on the Intel 8386 processor. The Compaq 386S machine that I have, which came later, was based on a cut-down version of the processor called the 8386SX. And the SX has only a 16-bit data bus instead of a 32-bit data bus. Otherwise, the CPU is the same internally. But it meant that you could work with cheaper peripherals and support chips because they only had to be 16-bit bus compatible. And of course there would have been a lot of those still around from the 16-bit era. So that made for cheaper computers, and so what I'm hoping is that my adapter board is adapting between a 16-bit bus and these memory modules, and that this one goes from 32-bit bus to the memory modules. If that's the case, then everything will be fine. By the way, this is exactly the same strategy that Intel pulled when they brought out the original 8086 chip. That was 16 bits internally, 16-bit data bus. A little later they brought out the 8088, which had 16 bits internally but only an 8-bit data bus, and meant that it could connect up to 8-bit support and I/O chips that were plentiful at the time from the 8-bit era. And the 8386DX, which came along a little bit later than the SX, was actually a return to the 32-bit data bus of the original 8386. So they're essentially the same thing for all intents and purposes. It's only the SX that's different in between with 16-bit. So I'm going to try each of these expansion modules out one at a time. I'll have to set the switch block for 1 and 4 megabytes of extra memory on the expansion board, but all of this is well documented on the sticker that's inside my machine, so that shouldn't be any problem. I have the 1 meg module in at the moment, and that doesn't sound very promising, so I'm getting some beeping. Unfortunately, the memory module actually has all the pins labeled very carefully, so I know I have this around the right way, and I certainly have set the switch block correctly. So it looks like either that module is not compatible or is faulty. So I'm going to take that out and try the 4 mega module. This time I have the 4 megabyte module in, and it was a little harder to tell where pin 1 was, but I found a little check mark that seems to indicate that. So I'll turn the machine on, and there were no beeps, so that's promising. And we have a cursor. So let's see if it starts counting, and it seems to be working. So we should have 1 plus 1 plus 4 should be 6 megabytes, and we do. So it looks like this is working, which is fantastic news. Nothing to worry about there, that's just the Dallas real-time clock, of course. So I'm going to go ahead now and set up the hard drive on this again, and we'll try some things out and see whether the memory seems to be functioning correctly. Now, one thing that we couldn't do before with the smaller amount of memory was run Windows. So I'm going to do that now, and I'm not really sure whether we couldn't run it just because there are a lot of drivers loaded or something like that, or whether it was really just not able to run with the 2 megabytes of memory that we had. It seems that Windows 3.11 should run with 2 megabytes, but anyway, now we have 6, and we'll see if we get further. I think we got this far before, but we'll see if we get to the desktop, and it does look like it's going to go through. So that's great. It looks like the memory is actually working, which is fantastic. And it looks like we have the desktop. So the other thing that we couldn't do before was to run a demo that was on here called Aladdin. It's just a game demo. And so I'm going to try and run that and see whether that runs now. I think it's in the directory alademo, and it's Aladdin. And this just complained before. Yeah, so we're getting the same error here, EMS allocation error. So I'm going to look into that and see if I can get that going. Well, that turned out to be really interesting. So of course, because Compaq made the first 386, there were no expanded memory managers around for the 386 at the time, so they had to write their own. And so this is what this CEMM program is, the Compaq Expanded Memory Manager, which I found on the hard drive that I pulled out of the other 386. Now, I can't tell whether this is working or not, and I don't know what the options are for this, since there's no documentation that I can find. I did have a look around online, but this program is sort of treated like some kind of archaeological find, with museums saying we finally found a disk that contained an early version of, CEMM. And I did find a document that says that there is an operations manual that explains how to use this, but I cannot find a single copy of that operations manual online. So this really is early history and really fascinating stuff. So I think that Aladdin is trying to use an interface that just didn't exist yet, but there might be a way to get around this. So Windows 3.11 supports the Compaq 386S and has its own inbuilt memory manager, and so I believe that if I try to run Aladdin from within Windows, then the interface that Aladdin's looking for might be there, and we might be able to get it to run. Well, here we are in the file manager for Windows, and I'm just going to go into the alademo directory, and we'll try and run Aladdin from here and see whether it still complains about expanded memory. And it's taking a little while to load here. Let's see what happens. It's still flickering away, the hard drive light is flashing, and it looks like it's working. So there you go. It turns out that if you want to run these games, you have to use Windows rather than the Compaq memory manager. So I'm just going to start the game up here, and we'll have a look at how fast it runs on the Compaq. So I'm just going to run the little guy back and forth a little bit, and you can see that's really slow. He's just almost walking there. So yeah, but that's really cool that you can actually run this from Windows itself, but not from DOS, which is really funny. I imagine if I put EMM386 on here, then maybe it would work. Well, it's the next day, and I've made some changes overnight. I finally set up my US keyboard layout correctly, so I can now type on the machine. I also set up a zip drive on the parallel port, so I can copy files across from a machine with a CD-ROM drive. But more importantly for now, I actually got CEMM to work with the Aladdin demo. So basically I needed some expanded memory, and the options are so similar to EMM386 that I could actually find ones that would work. If you want 2 megabytes of expanded memory, you just give it the option 2048 and it'll do that. Now that fixed the EMS allocation error that I was having, but then I had an XMS allocation error. And if you go online and look this up, you'll find 99% of the posts in forums about this will say that you're using the wrong version of DOSBox. This is what it's come to, folks. Almost everyone now is using DOSBox rather than original hardware. Remaining posts, most of them say it's because you have more than 32 megabytes of RAM in your machine, or that you're using DOS 7, and there are various other completely unhelpful posts that tell you totally wrong things that couldn't possibly be related. But I was unable to find a single post that tells you how to deal with the XMS allocation problem. It turns out that it's just because there are so many things in config.sys and autoexec.bat using extended memory that there just wasn't any left, or it wasn't able to allocate any. And so I discovered, for example, that there was smartdrive.sys, which is some kind of disk caching utility, and ifshelp.sys, which is for, I don't know, file system support, I think. and smartdrive.exe as well, just for good measure. So I removed all of those, and then Aladdin actually fired up and started working. But while I was screwing around last night, I went to have some food and came back to the computer, and I discovered something really cool. So I found this amazing screensaver from the Deutsche Bundespost, which is no longer the postal service in Germany, or at least the current service is split off from this original group. And it's really cool. They have these fantastic animations. There are about 10 or 12 of them, which come up on the screensaver. So the Deutsche Bundespost was a huge employer in Germany. It was the second largest federal employer, and they actually were running from 1947 until 1995, and then they were split up into three companies. One did postal services, another did telecom, and another did banking. And so these screensavers are just really fantastic. There's a lot of effort gone into these, and I think this is an amazing piece of history. Most of these are all about mail being delivered all around the world in various different ways, and also into space apparently. And you can see here the logo of the Postdienst, and it's a mail horn. So this was something that was used in the 18th and 19th century to announce the arrival of the mail, either by horse or by coach. And then there's a lightning, or stylized lightning, below the mail horn. Here apparently they're delivering mail to the moon, which is something that I'm not aware of, but you never know. I'm not sure about this animal here. This looks a little bit more modern. This is obviously delivering mail by helicopter somewhere. I think this one is probably delivering somewhere in Southeast Asia. I don't think this is Thailand. Maybe Vietnam or something like this. Interestingly, that house that appears in the background actually appears in different locations. Maybe they're delivering mail by elephant here in India, perhaps? I'm not sure what this one's supposed to represent, but there are a lot of castles in Germany, so this could just be meant to be a German city or town. That looks like Big Ben in the background. I'm assuming this is an office in London, and I can't quite read what it says on the little sign on the filing cabinet there. I think it says Kiwi name something or other. I think it's advertising per diskette. I really cannot tell exactly what that is. I assume that's a little Easter egg put there by the designer of these graphics, but I really don't know what that is about. So I guess they also had to deliver to deserted islands. I guess there are some islands around, but I'm not sure that they did it by rowing out every day. That seems a little bit far-fetched to me. So we're back on the moon, and now there seems to be some kind of settlement on the moon, and we're delivering mail by rocket. There seem to be a few variations on the sky theme. Sometimes there's a guy hang gliding, sometimes there's an aeroplane, sometimes there's a helicopter. This is one I haven't seen before. Obviously this is the pyramids in Egypt. The interesting thing about this is they're just randomized, and so you have to watch for quite a long time before you see all of them. There might actually be more of these than I thought. Here's a little variation on the Egyptian theme. It looks like someone's died trying to cross the desert, and there's a vulture nearby. But it doesn't matter, he still gets his mail, apparently. It looks like he might have ordered a bottle of water on Amazon or something like that. The random number generator in this is a little bit weird. It seems to favour ones that you've already seen. So every now and again there's a new one which I've not seen before that pops up. So here obviously we're delivering mail over the ice on a sled. Here's another variation on the sky theme with a little earlier style of aeroplane. This one has a beautiful train. I don't think this is exactly what the trains looked like. I can find a picture online of a green train, as in the carriages were green with a red locomotive, but I can't find one that looks like this. This may have been a much earlier one that they had. You can see that the frame rate is very slow here. It's usually a couple of frames per second in most of these, at most. And hopefully those of you who've been watching my series on graphics on the 8086 can appreciate just how difficult it is to do animations on machines this old. Of course you can do it, and you can even get some reasonable frame rates, but it requires a lot of work. It's not something that you just get automatically because the machine's a 386, for example. I don't know how well this is optimized, and it certainly might be very poorly optimized, but the graphics are fantastic. The pixel art is just really wonderful in these. Here we have a zoom right into the island, and we can see that there's a pirate there. I'm guessing he's waiting for his mail to arrive. I haven't seen this one either. There just seem to be so many variations on these. It's really fantastic to watch. I guess that his mail's a bit late, so he might be a bit angry by the time the mail eventually turns up. I would have thought he would have had a peg leg if he was a pirate, so I'm not really sure, but this does look like Redbeard, certainly. Maybe the Postal Service doesn't want to deliver mail to him because he's a pirate. Yeah, he's getting really annoyed now. This is not good. Oh, no, he's not annoyed. He's actually getting excited because the mail is turning up. So let's see if he actually gets his mail. I imagine if the people had a sense of humour who made this, they've probably got a kind of cool animation for this one. But let's wait and see what happens. Maybe he gets mail every day, and so this is just a normal thing. We'll soon find out, I think. So yeah, here we go. Out comes the letter. I would have thought he'd get a package with something interesting, but it seems he's just getting a letter. And yeah, he's not really opening it. No, there we go. He's reading his letter. Well, that didn't go the way I thought it would. It doesn't seem very menacing as a pirate. Now he doesn't seem very happy. Yeah, he's got some tax to pay. Well, I think he better stay on the island. He doesn't look very happy about it either. Yeah, he's probably realised he's got another 5 years to stay on the island. Here's another version of the desert theme, and looks like we have a belly dancer this time, getting their mail under a palm tree. Well, I wonder if it was magical thinking that led to the splitting up of the Postal Service in the first postal reform and the eventual privatisation of its components. Here's another little variation on the rail theme. Well, it's been quite a while now, and I've finally seen another new one, this one where there's a person on the moon, apparently without a spacesuit, receiving his mail. But I think I'll leave it there. I'm sure that there are some more that I haven't seen, but this has just been an absolutely fantastic find. Obviously I'm going to leave this as my screensaver on Windows for sure. It's a really fantastic piece of computing history. I'm doing a little bit of benchmarking, and again, just note how slow animation is on this machine. So this is the DOSBench benchmark from Phil's Computer Lab that contains a whole load of different benchmarks. This is the Superscape benchmark, and it's getting a score of 5.2 here. So we've seen this on 486 machines that are really overclocked, and that of course it goes many times faster than this. So let's try out some of the other benchmarks as well. The Chris 3D benchmark doesn't actually run on this machine because it needs a coprocessor, so I'm running the PC Player benchmark. It takes quite a long time to load from the zip drive. In fact, everything seems to take a long time to load on this machine, but it does eventually get there, and at least it'll run in the 32200 mode. The 64480 modes don't seem to work. The machine doesn't have any problem with 64480, but for some reason the benchmarks here won't run in that mode. So maybe the Compaq VGA is a little bit non-standard as far as those particular benchmarks are concerned. Anyway, this is the PC Player benchmark, and you can see that it's very much a slideshow. This is even in 32200 mode, but given that it is a very early 16 megahertz 386, this is maybe not too much of a surprise. This is a very complicated 3D scene to render. But anyway, this is going to get a very low score of 1.0. Who said you can't run Doom on a 386? It's running perfectly well here. It's just a little bit slower than normal, that's all. The kids today, they just have no patience, I tell you. Well, all jokes aside, I am actually benchmarking here for a reason. So I have, I think, a little bit of a surprise to come. I don't actually know whether it works myself yet, so we'll find that out together. But one of the viewers on the last video I made on this machine suggested that if we do some benchmarking, we should do both real mode and protected mode benchmarking, since there should be a difference between these. So I believe that the first benchmark we ran is actually real mode, and the Superskate one, and the PC Player one is in protected mode. So I think we have that covered, but he suggested that we also run a benchmark called Top Bench for the real mode stuff. So I'm certainly going to look into that, and that will give us you know, a CPU, memory and video benchmark. So Doom here obviously does run, and it's actually surprising. You have you know, texture mapped graphics even, but of course it is really unplayable. In fact, I'm only getting in 2134 game ticks 10,203 real ticks. When I try to run Top Bench here, it immediately bombs out and it tells me that I'm running in protected mode. I'm not sure why that would be, because I'm actually just running from Compaq DOS. So what I'm going to do is disable the EMS in case that's somehow adding a protected mode layer here. I don't think so, but just to be on the safe side. That didn't seem to change anything, so I've re-enabled EMS, and I'm running Top Bench with the /p parameter, which it suggests to do if you're sure you're in real mode. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't see why it wouldn't be. So this has a whole database of other machines that have been benchmarked with this benchmark, and oh, if you're wondering why the particular viewer suggested to run this one, he happens to be the author of this one. So thanks, Jim, for this great benchmarking utility. I'll just start the benchmark up, and it looks like it does a memory test, maybe a CPU test, a video memory test, and some kind of 3D test, and it gives you a total number of microseconds for all the tests that are run. Now I've gone ahead and put the Compaq Deskpro 386S in the database on my zip drive here, so that I can compare with other systems. It also tells me that it's most similar to an IBM PS1 model 2121. So if I go out of the benchmark itself, and I will write these numbers down just in case, but we shouldn't need that given that it's now in the database. If I go into compare systems, I can actually find the Compaq 386S, and that's this system, and press tab, and then I can compare it with other systems. And amusingly, it tells me that a 286 16 megahertz machine is actually faster than this. So this was something that was used against the 386 when it first came out, to you know, as a marketing ploy, that hey, if you have a really well optimized 286, it's actually faster than an entry-level 386. So we'll see if that's true a little bit later, but for the moment we can do a comparison, for example, with 386DX40, which people might be a little bit more familiar with. It's a little bit more common as a 386 machine, and that's actually only 2 times faster than this machine. So a 486 66 megahertz is 5 times faster, and that explains why you can do so much more on those. I don't see a there is a custom DX4 here, but it doesn't seem to tell me what the yeah, so that's at 120 megahertz, That's only a little bit faster, again, 5.47 times faster according to this, on this particular benchmark. So there's a whole load of different machines here. We're way faster than an Amstrad PC 1512, and if I go down to the IBM PC 5150, well, it looks like that's 8.5 times faster than that. So yeah, there's really a lot of machines here that we can compare with. But now it's time to reveal the surprise that I have. Well, this is the surprise that I've been holding back. It's a 386T mainboard, and this is based on the original Intel 8386 chip at 16 MHz, so the same speed as the chip we have in our Compaq 386S machine, but it's not the SX chip. This has the full 32-bit data path, so we'll be able to do a comparison and see how much difference that actually makes, assuming this board works. When I first got this, the EEPROMs here were actually exposed, and it's very possible that if they've been exposed to too much ultraviolet light, then they're corrupted. Also, this whole thing was sold to me for parts, and so it may not work at all. The seller certainly hadn't tested it. It has an 8287 installed here, a coprocessor. I will take that out temporarily because we want to benchmark this without the coprocessor, since we don't have one in the other machine. When I first saw this slot here, I wondered what that was, and I thought maybe that's an extended ISA slot. I'm really just not familiar with those. But they look a little bit different, and I believe this is actually for a memory expansion module, and I guess it has to be big like this because it has to support 32 bits. And similarly, you have really a lot of memory chips here. There are 72 of them in total, and again, that's probably because of the 32-bit data path that's required. Depending on how it's implemented, it can really just double the number of RAM chips that you need. So the chips here, I'm not sure exactly what each of these does, but there's some kind of chipset, and they're all chips branded. I think the board is possibly a Hyundai board, but I'm not entirely sure about that. So I'm going to set this up on the bench, and I'll put in obviously a 16-bit ISA VGA card, and we can check whether this actually works. I've just propped this up on the bench temporarily with a Paradise 88 VGA card, and I've just powered it on, and I am actually hearing a RAM count. I'm not seeing it. We have a picture, so it does look like it's going to work, which is cool. I don't know how much RAM is in this. I didn't bother actually checking the chips, so I guess we'll find that out. I'm guessing it's only going to be a couple of megabytes, especially given how slow it is at counting the RAM. So yeah, it stopped at 2 megabytes, which is great. I don't have a keyboard or anything set up on this, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll set up the zip drive so that we can do some benchmarking. Well, I did get TopBench working on this machine, but I've had a lot of problems along the way. So the BIOS in this is very, very primitive. It only has about 5 or 6 options. They're more or less just yes or no, and they skip over options occasionally. So for example, setting up the floppy drive, which has made it extremely difficult to get anything running on here. I haven't managed to get a hard drive running at all because you have to select the type of drive. It doesn't allow you to put the parameters in. And I couldn't get a parallel port running at all either. So in order to get a zip drive working, I had to put a SCSI card on this. And that was also quite difficult because my DOS disk got corrupted at some point by the machine, and it's had all sorts of issues. In particular, it has been giving me memory parity errors. Now I've resetted all the RAM chips just to see whether that helps, and it doesn't seem to. I still do get the occasional memory parity error. So what I've done at the moment, I noticed that the turbo setting by default is the slower speed, and if you put the turbo switch on, it'll go at the higher speed. So this is at the slower speed at the moment, and what I'm going to do is when I actually do the benchmark for this machine, then I'll switch it over to the higher speed so I can get a benchmark into the database and then we should be able to do a comparison with other machines. I'll switch back to the slower speed to do that. So let me try and attempt that now and see how far we get. It might not work, but I'll try it a few times until we get it to go. So the database systems, I can add this system, so I'm just going to switch over now to the higher speed, just temporarily, so it can get a footprint for this machine. So I'll add this system, and it's getting timings, and it's got AT clone. I'm just going to change that to 386 just so that we can recognize this in the system. And now I should be able to switch back to the slower speed so that we don't get as great a chance of a parity error. And now when I do compare, I should find the 386, which is this machine, and now I can compare it to the Compaq 386, the Deskpro 386S. So you can see that this machine is 18% faster, or at least it is when you have turbo turned on. So that finally gives us an answer. It's not a huge difference by any stretch of the imagination, but it does make a little bit of difference to have that in real mode. Now, of course, protected mode might be a different story altogether. So now I'll try to run a protected mode benchmark, but I don't have all that much confidence that we're going to be able to get that to work. I think the parity errors are going to be too much of a problem, and I'm going to have to do some troubleshooting, probably replace some RAM chips before I can get that to go, and I won't have time to do all that troubleshooting today, unfortunately. Unfortunately, no dice with the PC Player benchmark. It just won't run. It immediately throws parity errors. So I'm going to have to diagnose this board and repair it, and that'll be for a later video. To finish out today, I'm actually going to show a demo that I couldn't run on the Compaq 386S before because there wasn't enough memory in the machine and because I didn't have the zip drive connected up. One final thing before I do that, I had the idea to run the PC Player benchmark with the turbo off, and as you can see, it doesn't have enough memory in this machine anyway, so there's no way we could run this without a memory expansion board. This is a demo called Untitled, and what I've done is I've gone through a set of about 10 fairly popular demos looking for one that's interesting. There's a couple of others that are very good, maybe even better, Crystal Dream and Heartquake, but I picked this one because it has nearly full screen texture map 3D, which is pretty impressive for a 16 MHz 386, so they've done a really fantastic job with this. Now there's no sound, of course. I've turned the sound off, partly to talk over it, but also because I don't have a sound card in here yet. So some of the demos don't actually run because they require a Gravis ultrasound, and I'm not sure what the story is, why the Gravis ultrasound became the sound card of choice for the demo scene, but I'll put a sound blaster in this at some point, and many of the demos will actually work with that. So that's something to look forward to for a future video. And I guess there's a few other things I'll do. I'll try and replace that 5 1/4 inch drive with one that matches, and get a plate for the hard drive to sit on, and of course put the Dallas real-time clock in. But the other thing I want to do on this machine, of course, is some demo effects myself, and just code some things up. Now, some of the demos didn't work on here. One of them warned that some monitors don't respond very well to it, and this one didn't. All of the demos that support PC speaker hang when you try to use the PC speaker. So that's a little bit of a surprise. There must be something different about these Compaq machines with regard to the PC speaker, but I don't know what that is. So basically that's all I have for this week, and I certainly hope you've enjoyed this. I certainly have. We'll definitely get back to this machine in the future. But I want to do that once I can get the other 386 working properly and diagnosed. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to upgrade the memory on that. That looks like it'll be quite difficult. But you can see here the frame rate on these graphics is really quite impressive. They've done a fantastic job in this. Very impressed with this demo. So I hope you've enjoyed this look at a second look at the Compaq 386S. If you have, don't forget to give a like and subscribe, and we'll see you in a later video. Bye.